So, as she said, I'm Emma Varjo, and I work as the UX lead at Frozenbyte. And today I'm here to talk to you about the prototyping we did in Trine 4. Oops. Here you go. I trust all, or most, if not all of you know already what prototyping is, so I'm not going to go over that. But I will tell you a little bit about Trine 4, just in case you don't know what the Trine series is about. So Trine 4 is a physics play-based platform puzzle game, that is a tongue twister, set in 2.5 dimensions, meaning that the movement happens in 2D, but the set is done in 3D. It has a very distinct and colorful art style, as you can see from the images attached. The player can choose from 3 characters with unique skills that they can switch between at will, and they can play with up to 3 of their friends in 4-player co-op, both on and offline. It will be out on PC, PS4, Xbox One, and Switch, so most importantly, PC and consoles, which has effects on design. It will be out next week, so this is a sneak peek for you guys. And as it's the 4th installment in a series, what I'll be talking about is the UI prototyping, because the gameplay prototyping focused mostly on individual skills and puzzles and was done in Engine because we figured that we had the general UX of the game set. So that is not as exciting to talk about here. So for the first time in our history, we had a dedicated UX team early on in production. Before, we had usually artists and our writers design the menus toward the end of the production when they had time and energy to do that. And then we threw programmers at the problem until it went away, which didn't result in the best kind of menus, both in like the user experience and also, yeah, thank you, and the programming or the usability of the code, because you have to revisit that, and that took a while. So the iteration took a lot of time when we were creating them. Now we had a designer and an artist set aside to do just this from the beginning, and we had a programmer who we knew would be working on the UI. At the time, he was working mostly on gameplay and other programming tasks, because we don't have too many programmers lying around so they can wait around for UI just to appear for them to code, so they were doing other things. But we discussed with him on how to communicate and get this done, so we had the group set from the beginning. And yeah, our goal was to basically move iteration time from the programming phase to the design phase, so that would be faster to see the problems and get them done. As a side note, we were restricted in the software we could use for designing because our engine only works on Windows, so we don't have any Macs. And as some of you might know, a lot of fancy, really nice software for designing is only for Macs, so it was a scramble at times to find things that we could work with. So, as we had our team, first thing we did was sit down all together, talk about how we would communicate, what we would do, and we identified 3 types of menus that we would treat as a group. First off was the basic menus, or the largest chunk of the menus. This includes things like starting a new game, the options menu, all these sorts of things that we thought that we could just kind of set a layout and kind of bang them out. Next up was level select. That was so close to the game that we thought that we could make that more on the experience side rather than efficient usability side of things. And third, there was the skill tree that we thought was sort of in between of all these things. And now I'll go through each and see what we did and how it turned out. So here are menus from earlier Trines and 9 Parchments, which is also set in the same universe, even though it's not in the series. And in them, as with Trine 4, we sort of saw these menus, the basic menus, as a necessary evil that kind of have to be there. If they're not, this is a problem, but they don't have to be flashy, they just have to be efficient and there to get things done. And the goal for the menus was to get them as frictionless, as easy to use as possible. But for the design team, the goal was to get the design done quickly and make it so that they're easy to implement. And basically, for the entire team, just to get the easy and boring menus, as we kind of felt about them, done and in the game as fast as possible. A side note here is that we didn't have any data to back things up, but as you can see, we had this great innovation of adding a background to the menus in the year 2017 for 9 parchments. So there were easy wins to gain, even though we didn't have any complaints from the players or hard data to back things up. The thing that we did was a navigation flow prototype done purely with wireframes on Adobe XD. It was completely clickable from the moment you start the game, so you get to the main menu, to the moment you get to level select, which was a different project. We were very excited about this because it was the first time this was done. And we announced it to the entire team going, hey, look at this cool thing we did. And some people went, it looks really cool. And that was it. Luckily, we had decided that we would sit down with key stakeholders for all of our prototypes. And for this one, we had identified our lead designer as the main key stakeholder. Sat down with him, had him play around with it, had some specific questions for him to answer on what he thought about things, just to sort of get us on the same page that we're using the right mental models and getting there. And he said it was okay, there were minor tweaks that we did, and we went on, and that was the only testing that we really did. At this point, we thought that the greatest thing to come out of this entire thing was the way we laid things out on Adobe XD, because we could just take a screenshot and turn it into a flowchart. Sorry, I've lost the word. But yeah, a flowchart to add to the written documentation, because it's faster to glance how you get from main menu to the end of options, rather than having to click through and remember the way. So we didn't really think that much of the prototype at this point. But come development time, people started to really pay attention. First, programmers, obviously, as they were programming it, and the rest of the team as the menus got in the game. And it went fairly okay, but there were some surprising issues that came up, most notably the way saving worked. No one had sat down to design the back end of the saving. We had sat down and talked about the front end, how to get there, and what to show. And the programmers kind of went, well, we did this in our previous titles, so we think that this should work like this now. And they were totally incompatible. So we had to sit down, talk it through, what they were thinking, what we were thinking, kind of figure out, is there a middle ground? There wasn't. So which one do we pick, and how do we go about it? So there was a little bit of rework and talking through, but we got through it fairly quickly. Another thing that happened, as is fairly usual, is that the design was refined and changed a little bit. So some menus were added toward the end of the thing as we were moving past the design. But as we had defined a layout and basic assets, they're easy to add in. Like a checkbox is a checkbox, no matter what kind of menu it's in, right? Beyond that, small adjustments to look and feel weren't required, but those were not inherent in the wireframe, obviously, because it was bare bones to begin with. And here is the final menu, or a glimpse of it, because the GIF got too big really quickly, so I'm showing just a tiny bit of it. But I'd say that the goals set for the team were met really well. The layout was there, so even when things were added, they were quickly to design and implement. There were some hiccups, like the save files, that could have been found out earlier if we tested or talked things through with the programmers earlier on. But because we got over that hump fairly quickly, we felt really good about this, what we did, and what we ended up with. And next week, we'll hear if the players like it, so here's hoping. Going forward, we're very glad to know that Adobe XD now supports gamepad navigation. As I said, we're making this for PC and consoles, so it's very beneficial to be able to test it with a gamepad, considering we only had it clickable with a mouse, which is definitely not the same thing. Another big thing is to go wider with the people we think are important. We had the one person, and we had it going really well because we're both designers, so we were surprised by the programming problems that we ended up with. and it's just more respectful to think more people are important than just the designers, obviously, so do that. Another thing, Joanna was talking yesterday about localization, and that's what we do as well. Another thing about doing things for consoles, the consoles have a list of requirements themselves. So sitting down, even with the wireframe, with people who know about localization and the requirements by the console providers is a good thing. Obviously, the menus aren't ready when they're in wireframes, but there are like you will know if there's text in this menu or this part of the menu. So even if it's not clear if it's going to be a problem, you can do the placeholder thing and just like get ready and prepare for possible problems in the future when you're documenting the design. But yeah, that's it for the basic menus. And next up, level select that we were very excited about. That again, we thought was fairly easy to do better, especially in Trine 2, it was a list on the left, and on the right, it was a wall of text of details of your progress within that level. That was not very exciting. There's a picture at the bottom kind of to remind you what the level looked like, but that was it. In Trine 3, which was set in completely 3D world, we had a 3D tabletop game that you could run around on and select levels on. And we and players both were very excited about that and thought that, okay, that worked well, and now we have a team, so we can do something more akin to this with Trine 4. We tried a few mental models, like tapestries with the lists or something, but we kept coming back to the map. It just lends itself so easily as a metaphor to traveling. You start from the beginning, you go through different levels, and they look different, so you can draw them on the map to show, like, remind you what they are, and to get to the end. But there were some big questions here. Trine 3, the map worked really nicely because it was in 3D, so you could run around in 3D. Now it was in 2D, the movement, and we wanted that to be reflected in the map. And that works fine if you want to go back or forward a level, but what if you want to jump back or forward 5 levels, or from the first to last level or something? It needs to work and not be annoying to the player. And as you saw, the art style is very nice and embellished, so we wanted to have space for that and yet show all the information. So we didn't want it to be crowded. So there was a lot of things to think about. We did this on Actua RP8, and it's fully interactive, clickable prototype. We started off with just a few things. I think we had problems communicating, and that's when this was born out of a real need. We thought that once you select a level, we could zoom in. And it turned out zooming in meant really different things to different people. Does it just mean that the image gets bigger, so it's a tiny thing, for a relatively tiny thing for a programmer to do? Or do they say there's a house? Does it zoom in inside the house, so you have to draw completely new assets and everything, which means a lot of work for the artists and a little bit of work for the programmers. So we started with that, and it kept growing and ended up being a fully interactive prototype. We did a few of these to try out different modes of navigation and ended up with this. Again, we were very excited. This is like the most exciting thing I think I've done, like a single artifact at my job ever. And we announced it to the team and went around actually with like random people to show it. Not really test it, but like, look at this, I made this, it's really cool. And this time we went a lot wider with the key stakeholders that we talked to, because this was more complicated. So we talked to the programmers, we talked to the artists, we talked to the writer, we talked to the designers. I don't even remember everyone. And we talked it through, they clicked around, they liked it, we picked this mode of navigation, and we moved on. And because we talked to so many people, especially people who would be actually making this menu, the development went really well. We set the expectations and communication paths very clearly from the beginning. So even though it was a lot of work, it was just doing the work. It wasn't checking, oh no, you did this wrong, you need to move this a little bit, or redo this. It was just getting it done. So we were very glad at this point. And this is what it looks like now in the game. It is way fancier than I ever dreamed, considering we had early mock-ups and assets from previous games to do the thing with. Here we had our 2D artist draw a beautiful map that we turned into a poster and everything for our team. And the navigation is pretty much the same. The biggest thing we changed is that we only show high-level information on the level while you're navigating the levels, and as you select the level, you see more detailed information to get it feel less cluttered. We were very happy with both the prototype, the end result, and the way we worked on this. Going forward, we were super excited, as I keep saying, and obviously because it worked so well, and I did it, so I'm excited. I want to do more of these and do more tests and more communication through this. It doesn't need to be very formal, like, you know, if you've read books, you have like written tests of like, you have to do this or try this out. No, you can just walk up to a person and see them use it. And for prototypes, as you saw before, we had the wireframe one and this one. So there's a lot of wiggle room between how much effort you put into making the prototype. You can kind of find the sweet spot into what is good amount of effort for the bang you're getting out of it. And another thing is that prototype is a good thing to add to tasks you give to programmers and testers, but it's not sufficient on its own, because there are so many things going on. You need to write down that these are the most important things that you focus on, but here's the prototype that you can try out to see what I mean when I write this out, not only between designers and programmers, but later on with testers who usually communicate a lot less with designers and programmers. They are just given things to test. So that worked really well for everyone. And last but not least is the skill tree. Here are the skill trees from the original Trine and Trine 2. So they're not a new thing. There are 3 characters. They have skills that you can upgrade or get in the game. But what we had this time was that we had 2 different types of skills. Skills that you get automatically from experience you gain from battles that you either have or you don't. And then there are skills that you can buy with skill points that you find throughout the levels. So we had a lot more to communicate in our level, or in this menu this time around. This is an early animation we made of that menu. We had a few skills, or we call the purple ones skills. They're bigger, they're purple, they have a fancy frame. And then there are the upgrades that are smaller and pink and less fancy on the frame side. And we laid them out. The higher the skill is, or the upgrade, the earlier you can get it. If the upgrade is linked to a skill, you have to get the skill before you can get the upgrade, so on and so forth. We thought that this was really nifty. It's still, it's familiar to people who have played Trine 2 before, and it was very logical in what we did. We were making this, we had a static image and a few of these animations as we went to talk to the lead artist and lead designer. And I was working on the level select prototype at this point. So we talked about how high fidelity of a thing we're making with this one for the prototype, because the artist is not very comfortable with programming, whereas I am. And actually RP8 requires a programming mindset. But the artist is very good at After Effects, so she was good at doing these animations. So we figured out that for this one, we do a static mock-up, these animations and written documentation, so we can do the 2 prototypes, or this in quotation marks, simultaneously. And again, we talked it through with the key stakeholders. We announced it to the team, and this time around there were a lot more people in the team inherently excited about or interested in this menu, and by a lot more I mean I think 2. And they asked questions about this. They checked out the images, the animations, they did not read the documentation that we wrote, asked questions, and we explained how it works, and we all thought that, oh, this is going to work fine, this is good. It turns out it was not good. As sometimes happens, the design changed after the menu design was done, and there were a lot more skills added. This is the final mock-up we had for the menu. We had tweaked the look and feel of the different skill images, so there were different shapes as well as sizes and colors. But the vertical information is lost. There are so many more skills than we had in our original plans that the ones on the left, you can't really tell if they're higher than the ones on the right or even on the middle. And as this was programmed in, it was actually in the game and working. People who weren't privy to the designs started using it and were very confused, asking questions like, why is this almost but not quite in a grid? That's really annoying. How do I connect, how do I tell the difference between the skills and upgrades and what experience goes with them? Because the rectangles are yellowish or beigeish, and the star on the bottom is yellow, so that kind of goes together. You can make that connection, but then there's a yellowish pinkish arrow which can go with either one of the skills. So there were a lot of these questions that started adding up, and we were quite embarrassed that we hadn't caught this earlier on. This is what the menu looks like now. There are a lot of things like the shapes and colors are very similar, but we've turned it into a grid, completely got rid of almost the vertical placement of the things. Obviously, still the higher the skill, the earlier you get it, but now the background that's purple if they are locked is based or locked on a single character's tree. So it goes down on one character when you get that skill, and then the other one when you unlock that one. There are experience icons attached to the corner of the skill images, so it's easy to see which experience boats go with each one, so on and so forth. So we've discussed is whether we completely redesigned this or not. I'm willing to say yes, because the mental model for the layout is changed completely, but the assets, and interestingly enough, many of the micro interactions that we animated in are still the same. But all in all, this was not a success. I'm not calling it a complete failure either, but there was a lot of iteration that happened in the programming phase, which is exactly what we were trying to avoid. In the future, it's easy in hindsight to say that we should have tested more, but obviously we should have tested more. Maybe not every time it changed. Sometimes the change is very gradual, so it's hard to see. But there were moments when we looked at it and wondered, okay, is this still working? Maybe we should start from scratch. But we did that only within our team, which is a grave mistake. We were very married with the idea. We thought that it was really good, so maybe it'll work. People had said it worked before, so maybe we'll make it work now. Did not. Test it with people. We didn't have a fancy prototype like we had with level select or even with the basic menus, but we had the mock-up, so we could have printed it out, turned it into a paper prototype, and walked to a person. It was not beyond our means, but we just did not do it. So that is a big lesson that we learned here. All in all, in summary, interactive prototypes especially, but prototypes in general, are very useful for communicating the design, and I am willing to say that they worked very well and were beneficial for the design of UI in Trine 4. I do like interactive prototypes better than paper prototypes, because even for paper prototypes, there is this layer of I would click here, so you have to think about what you're doing. With interactive prototypes, you can just go and click on it. But when you have the person testing it go through the motions of using it, you reveal their mental models, their assumptions a lot better than when you're just talking through things like we had with the skill tree. And like you saw, they were all very different, so you can control the fidelity of the things, starting from paper prototypes done on wireframes that you just scribbled to paper prototypes with fancier images that we had, or to navigation prototypes, interactive prototypes with wireframes, to fancier interactive prototypes. So there's a lot of wiggle room that you can find to get the perfect level for your prototype fidelity. And a last and key point is that do not expect people to give feedback to you unless you specifically ask for it. And when you do, make it as easy as possible for them to give it to you. So don't just announce that I want feedback, please. Go to the person, give them the prototype, tell them to do this. Like, first, obviously, it's good to have them click around on it, but then have specific questions on like, okay, how would you load a game? How would you select a level? How would you jump to the 7th level? Give them small tasks to get to all the information that you need, that you want to test for. And I did a lot faster than I expected, but I am done, so maybe there's time for questions now.
Do we have, yeah, there's a question right here. Right here.
Right. Hi, thank you very much. I have a question regarding Adobe XD. Did you find it a sufficient tool for interactive prototyping? And if not, what were you missing?
That is an interesting question. There's a lot of tutorials that I watched that did a lot fancier things, but they were all focused on mobile side. So there were really fancy transitions between screens that we couldn't use because we wanted to fade in fancier than they could do that, and they were sliding in left, right, front, and center. But for the wireframe prototype, that was exactly what we needed. We needed just to get an idea of where we're going. So for the tool, once you understand what it can do, you can kind of figure out, is it worth what you want from the prototype, and if the tool is able to do that. And for us, it did. But for the fancier ones, we'd use different ones. So it depends on the tool and what you could do.
Your ones, as is the interactive map that you've showed, you couldn't do that on Adobe XD.
I felt that I couldn't. I'm not sure if you could, but it was just so much faster to get it done on Axure. Because I was learning all of these as I went along. If I was very, very familiar with Adobe XD, maybe I would have done it with that rather than learning a new tool. But I was getting frustrated very easily with everything. So I saw that I could do this with Axure faster and closer to what I was thinking in my head. So I used that instead.
There's one of the questions here, and then we have to go on the break. Did you find people were more interested in more visually polished prototypes than your white boxes? And did you find it hard to get feedback purely on function?
Yes. The feedback we got for both when we just announced it to the team was, yay, this is really cool, thanks for making it. But it was a lot more enthusiastic for the level select one than for the basic menu one. So yeah. That is a definite yes, but you have to be careful as well to not to make it too high fidelity, because if it was very endgame-like, people have difficulties commenting on it and giving critical feedback because they feel that it's already done. But especially for our artists, when it was purely wireframe, they had difficulty seeing what it could look like. So they needed higher fidelity stuff, and they could actually comment on like things done with final assets. So it depends on the person as well.
Sweet. We're going to go on the break, so if you have more questions for Emma, feel free to just go talk to her. And we will be back at 11:20. So thank you so much, Emma. See you soon.
Thank you.